The hospital room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the slow drip of the IV bag. A fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead, casting a harsh glow across the whitewashed walls. On the bed lay a tall, dark-skinned man. His eyes were alert but heavy with exhaustion, his breathing shallow, his skin slick with sweat. He turned his head slightly as the doctor entered. A white man in his late 40s, the physician carried himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His stethoscope swung loosely around his neck, his eyes already scanning the chart in his hand with impatience. "You don't deserve expensive medicine," the doctor said flatly, without even looking up. His words fell with the weight of a gavel. The patient blinked, the insult cutting deeper than the pain in his chest. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, raspy, but steady. The doctor finally looked at him, smirking. "I said you don't deserve it. These advanced drugs, these therapies, they're for patients who matter, people who can afford them, not someone like you." The man's jaw tightened. "Someone like me?" The doctor's smirk grew sharper. "You walked in here with no private insurance, no paperwork to prove you could cover a dime of it. And yet you want access to medication that costs more than most people's yearly salary? Be realistic." A nurse entered quietly, carrying a tray. She glanced between the two men, sensing the tension. The doctor gestured at the generic pills on the tray. "This will do for him. No need to waste anything else." The nurse hesitated. "But, doctor, his blood work." "Enough," the doctor snapped, cutting her off. "Do as I say." The nurse lowered her gaze, setting the tray down on the bedside table before slipping out. The patient turned his eyes back to the doctor. His chest rose and fell with controlled fury, but his tone remained calm, almost frighteningly calm. "You took an oath to heal, not to judge." The doctor scoffed. "My oath doesn't mean giving charity to every man who walks through these doors. Medicine isn't free, and you're not the kind of person who gets the best of it." The man studied him for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. "One day, you'll regret those words." The doctor chuckled, unconcerned. "I doubt it. Men like me don't answer to men like you." Silence filled the room, broken only by the beep of the monitor. The patient closed his eyes, steadying his breath. To anyone else, he looked powerless, just another man trapped beneath sterile sheets, dependent on the whims of a dismissive physician. But behind his calm expression, his mind was already working. Because the doctor didn't know who he really was. Not yet. The hours crawled by slowly, each minute marked by the unsteady drip of the IV line. The man lay motionless, staring at the ceiling, trying to steady his breathing. His chest tightened with every inhale, but the medication coursing into his veins was little more than a placebo compared to what he needed. Outside his room, voices drifted through the half-open door. 2 nurses stood by the station, their tones hushed but sharp enough to carry. "Did you see the prescription they denied him?" one whispered. The other scoffed. "Of course. That drug costs thousands a dose. He thought he'd just ask and get it? Please. But his labs? Don't be naive. He doesn't look like the kind of man who gets that treatment. They're already wasting resources keeping him here." Their laughter was quiet, but it felt louder than the beeping machines. The man shifted slightly in bed, his jaw tightening. He had heard every word. Moments later, an orderly came in to check his vitals. He adjusted the cuff on the man's arm, but didn't meet his eyes, didn't speak, just scribbled numbers onto a chart before walking out again. The indifference cut deeper than the cruelty. Across the hall, a patient groaned in pain. Within minutes, 3 nurses rushed in, comforting him, adjusting his IV, checking his vitals. The contrast was unmistakable. Care for some, neglect for others. The man's breathing hitched, and he pressed a hand against his chest. He wasn't asking for luxury, wasn't asking for favors. He was asking to be treated like a human being. And yet, in this place, he was little more than an inconvenience. Later, when the doctor returned for rounds, he flipped through the chart with disinterest. Vitals stable. Keep him on generics. He'll be fine. The man looked directly at him. I'm not fine. My condition requires the newer medication. You know that. The doctor smirked, not even glancing up. And I told you, those drugs aren't for you. Don't push your luck. Luck? The man asked softly. Is that what you call healthcare? The doctor leaned closer, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. Healthcare is a privilege, not a right. And you, my friend, are at the bottom of the list. With that, he left the room, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The man stared at the door long after it closed, the doctor's words replaying in his mind. At the edge of his vision, he noticed the shadow of someone lingering, an intern, young and hesitant, holding a clipboard. She had overheard everything. Her eyes darted to his, wide with a mixture of pity and guilt, before she turned and hurried away. For a long moment, the man lay still, his mind churning. They thought they had stripped him of dignity, reduced him to silence. But he wasn't powerless. Not truly. They just didn't know it yet. The hospital corridors hummed with chatter, the kind that thrives when judgment replaces compassion. Nurses passed one another with raised eyebrows, whispering just loud enough for others to overhear. Did you hear? He asked about the new drug again. Unbelievable, like he's entitled to it. I swear, people will do anything for attention. Their voices carried into the man's room, each word another weight pressing down on him. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe evenly, though the tightness in his chest made it difficult. In the break room, the doctor leaned against the counter, sipping coffee. He keeps insisting he needs the new regimen, he told the others, smirking, as if we're just handing out miracles on demand. One nurse laughed. He doesn't look like someone who can even afford a single dose. Why waste time? The doctor shrugged. Exactly. Give him generics and keep him quiet. If he survives, fine. If not, well, at least we didn't waste resources. The laughter that followed was cruel, echoing down the sterile halls. In his bed, the man shifted uncomfortably, trying to block out the voices. His mind drifted back to the moment it all began. He had been in his office sleek glass walls overlooking the city skyline. Papers spread across the desk, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling beside a glowing laptop. He remembered standing to speak with his assistant when the pain struck. A sharp, crushing pressure in his chest that stole his breath. Sir, are you all right? She had asked, panic rising in her voice. He remembered gripping the edge of the desk, the world tilting around him. Then darkness. When he came to, paramedics hovered above him, their voices urgent. We need to get him to St. Andrews. Best cardiac team in the city. He hadn't argued. He couldn't. His world blurred as the siren screamed and the ambulance sped through the night. Now, lying here, he thought of that moment with bitter irony. They had brought him to the best. And here he was, dismissed, belittled, treated as unworthy of the very care that had been promised. Back in the hospital break room, the young intern from before sat silently, her hands gripping her clipboard. She had overheard everything, the doctor's mocking words, the laughter. She finally spoke up, her voice trembling. What if he really needs it? What if we're wrong? The room fell quiet for a moment, then erupted with chuckles. The doctor sneered. You're new here. You'll learn. Some patients exaggerate, some pretend, and some simply don't matter enough for the system to bend. The intern's face flushed with shame. She looked down, but inside, her conscience screamed. The man lay in silence, eyes open now, staring at the ceiling. He remembered his assistant's face in the ambulance, the fear in her eyes. He remembered the contracts waiting on his desk, the calls he hadn't returned, the board meetings scheduled for tomorrow. They thought he was powerless here, just another anonymous patient in a thin hospital gown. But outside these walls, he was anything but anonymous. The morning sun streamed weakly through the narrow hospital window, but it did little to warm the room. The man shifted slightly, grimacing as a sharp pain lanced through his chest. He pressed the call button, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing. Finally, the door opened. A nurse entered, her expression annoyed, as though she had been inconvenienced. "What now?" she asked flatly. "I can't breathe properly," the man rasped. "The medication isn't helping." She glanced at the monitor, shrugged, and muttered, "Your vitals are stable enough." She scribbled something on the chart without looking at him. "You'll survive." His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Outside the room, the gossip continued unchecked. Two orderlies leaned against the wall, talking loudly. "He keeps pressing the call button like he's royalty." "Yeah, like he expects us to drop everything for him, I swear." Some patients think they're above the rest. They chuckled, unaware that their voices carried through the half-open door. The man closed his eyes, swallowing the anger burning inside him. Later, during rounds, the doctor appeared again, flanked by two residents. He flipped the chart open lazily. "Still alive?" he asked, mockingly, not even glancing up. The man's voice was steady, though weak. "The treatment you've given me isn't working. You know I need the newer medication." The doctor smirked. "And I told you, you don't deserve it. We save those drugs for patients who are worth the investment. People who can pay. People who contribute." One of the residents shifted uncomfortably. "But sir, the labs—" "Quiet," the doctor snapped, silencing him. Then, turning back to the man, he added with a sneer, "You think you're important? You're just another bed we have to fill. Nothing more." The words echoed in the sterile room, a deliberate wound. When they left, the man turned his head slowly, his gaze falling on the nightstand. His wallet sat there, half hidden beneath the flimsy hospital gown. A sleek black leather case, embossed with gold initials. The nurse who had brought in the tray earlier had glanced at it, frowning slightly, as though the quality didn't match the type of patient they assumed he was. And on the small table in the corner sat his phone, buzzing occasionally with messages he hadn't checked. Each notification was from names that, if read aloud, would have silenced the entire hospital. Board members, investors, politicians. But here, no one bothered to look. That afternoon, as he lay half dozing, a cleaner entered quietly to empty the trash. She glanced at him, hesitated, then spoke in a low, apologetic voice. "I'm sorry about how they're treating you." His eyes opened, meeting hers. There was kindness there, something missing from everyone else. "You don't deserve this," she whispered. "I saw the way the doctor spoke to you. It was wrong." For the first time since he had arrived, the man allowed himself a faint smile. "Thank you," he murmured. She nodded quickly and slipped out, leaving him alone again. In the staff lounge, the doctor's voice carried over the hum of conversation. "Mark my words, this guy's going to complain. They always do. But guess what? No one's going to listen. He's nobody." The young intern sat in the corner, silent, gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles whitened. She thought of the man's steady gaze, his calm voice even under insult. Something told her he wasn't nobody. And she was right. Afternoon light washed the room in a pale rectangle, dust motes drifting like slow snow. The man lay half-turned on his side, one hand against his ribs, breaths shallow and deliberate. The generic drip ticked into his vein with the indifference of a clock. Nothing changed but time. Footsteps halted outside. A nurse's voice, sharp, officious. "You can't just walk down this hall without clearance." A woman answered, level and crisp. "I called the floor an hour ago. I'm his assistant. Family only. His wife authorized me. Here." The rustle of paper. Hyper-release. And this authorization to pick up personal effects. Silence, then a reluctant exhale. "Fine, 10 minutes." The door opened. A woman in her early 30s stepped in, professional composure wrapped in a navy blazer. She carried a slim leather folio and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Her eyes softened when she saw him. "Sir," she said softly, moving to the bedside. "How are you?" He gave a restrained smile. "I've been better." She glanced at the IV bag, and a flicker of alarm crossed her face. "They still haven't started the recommended protocol?" According to our physician, he murmured. I don't deserve it. Her jaw tightened. She lowered her voice. Board meeting is asking for you. I told them you're unavailable until this is handled. She set the folio on the tray, deliberately angled so the gold embossed emblem on the cover, his company's crest, caught the light. Also, building management has called twice. He held her gaze a heartbeat too long, a silent reminder to tread carefully. She nodded, understood, and edited herself in real time. They're asking about facilities matters related to this address. A nurse swept in with a tablet, feigning breezy cheerfulness. Time for vitals. Her eyes flicked to the folio, lingered on the gold crest, then snapped back to the screen. She wrapped the cuff around his arm with practiced speed, the Velcro's rip like a reprimand. Has the doctor reconsidered the regimen? The assistant asked, polite but edged. The nurse didn't look up. The doctor determines clinical necessity. The assistant smiled thinly. Of course. Then we'll speak with the department head. That won't change anything, the nurse said, a shade too quickly. The cuff released with a sigh. Numbers blinked green. The nurse tapped, 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 then left without a word. The assistant leaned close, speaking low. The press is circling an unrelated story. If they catch scent of this, it won't stay unrelated. He shook his head once. Not yet. The door opened again. This time, the doctor. His smirk arrived ahead of him. Well, he said, scanning the assistant like a customs agent, I see we have administrative company. The assistant straightened. I'm here with the patient's authorization. Family only, he repeated, bored. Hippo release on file, she returned, unblinking. And I have a few questions about why the recommended therapy was withheld despite qualifying labs. He smiled without warmth. Because the recommended therapy is expensive, and, if you're taking notes, not medically required for this class of patient. The man on the bed spoke, voice quiet. What class is that? The kind that doesn't justify the cost, the doctor said, still watching the assistant. You can quote me. The assistant exhaled, almost a laugh. You're certain? Positive. Her phone vibrated. She glanced down, then up. Sir, facilities just escalated. The doctor scoffed. What facilities? She ignored him, turning the screen so the patient could read a single line of a text. Lease counsel on hold. Urgent. She tilted it away before the doctor could pass more. They need a yes or no on timelines. The patient nodded once. Put them through. On speaker. The assistant tapped, then set the phone on the tray. A voice came bright and crisp through the tiny speaker. Good afternoon. We're finalising renewal language for the medical complex at 400 Pierce Your Building. City submitted the fireproofing inspection sign-off. Also, the hospital's request for expansion hinges on owner consent. Do you want to? The assistant stabbed the mute button. The room went very still. The doctor laughed. Too loud. Too quick. Cute. Very cute. Is this a little game to impress me? The man met his eyes, calm as stone. No game. A shape moved in the doorway. The young intern, half hidden, eyes wide. She had heard every syllable. Her gaze slid to the folio's crest, then to the phone, then back to the man meaning snapped into place like a lock. The doctor waved a dismissive hand. Enough theatrics. We're not changing the medication. You'll be discharged on generics when you're stable. Save your tantrums for billing. The assistant spoke with measured quiet. Doctor, one question. If an owner of a medical property requested a quality of care audit of his tenant, would that be within a hospital's comfort zone? His smile faltered. What are you implying? Nothing, she said, already sliding the phone back toward her. Just asking about comfort. The monitor ticked its indifferent rhythm. The sunlight shifted. The doctor cleared his throat, found his balance. Enjoy your visit, he said, and turned to go. At the door, he tossed over his shoulder. And keep your facilities chatter out of clinical decisions. He was gone. The intern stepped in, cheeks flushed. Sir, she whispered to the patient, If you have chest pressure again, press the button twice. I'll come. She swallowed. I'm sorry. He studied her for a second, then nodded. Thank you. The assistant waited until the hall was quiet. He'll pay for that sentence, won't he? Not today, the man said. He gestured faintly to the drip. Today, we keep breathing. She hesitated. Do you want me to call legal? Drafts only, he said. No deliveries. Not until I walk out of here. And the lease renewal? His eyes moved to the IV bag, to the generic label fluttering against clear plastic. Hold, he said softly. Let them wonder why. The assistant closed the folio gold crest, winking under the pallid light, and squeezed his shoulder. A quick, human gesture. Yes, sir. When she left, the room felt different. Same ducts, same hum, same thin blanket. But the air had shifted. Somewhere down the corridor, the doctor laughed with someone. The intern's footsteps fled in the opposite direction. The man lay back, eyes on the ceiling. Power didn't change the ache in his chest, but it did change the horizon. The drip ticked on, counting seconds. Outside, a storm was forming in emails and empty boardrooms. Inside, he breathed and waited. The administrator's office was a hive of interruptions. Phones rang incessantly. Assistants shuffled papers, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee. Behind a wide desk stacked with files, the hospital's chief administrator pressed her hand to her forehead as the speakerphone crackled. We'll need confirmation from ownership before any expansion permits are finalized. A clipped voice said, If the building owner declines, the city freezes approvals. That includes your cardiac wing project. The administrator forced a smile that no one could see. We've had no indication of resistance from the landlord. A pause on the other end. Then, he's asked us to hold all renewals, effective immediately. The administrator's smile faltered. Excuse me? Until further notice, the voice repeated. If you want expansion, you need his signature. The line clicked dead. She sat back, stunned. The owner's identity was supposed to be a formality, some investment firm, some faceless shell. Not this. Her eyes darted to the folder on her desk. The name on the lease. She whispered it aloud, almost afraid. It can't be him. Meanwhile, in the ward, the young intern lingered outside the patient's room, her heart hammering. She had watched the doctor dismiss him again and again, watched the nurse scribble half-truths onto his chart. Her conscience screamed louder with every beep of the monitor. Finally, she slipped into the charting station, logging in with trembling fingers. She scrolled through lab results, her eyes widening. Elevated markers, irregular rhythms, clear indications for the advanced medication. Her breath caught. He had qualified for the trial protocol days ago. Hands shaking, she pulled the file, printed it quickly, and tucked the papers into her coat. Her mentor's voice echoed in her head. Never contradict a supervising physician in public. But she couldn't ignore it anymore. She stepped into his room, closing the door softly behind her. The man turned his head, his dark eyes steady despite his fatigue. You came back, he said quietly. She swallowed hard and handed him the papers. Your labs. You qualify. For the new drug. They've been lying. He studied the pages, his brow furrowing. He looked up at her, voice even. Why are you showing me this? Because I can't watch them let you suffer, she whispered. And because you're not who they think you are you? His lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. Not exactly. She flushed, realizing she had pushed too far. But his calmness only deepened the sense that she was standing before someone far larger than the gown and the monitors suggested. In the break room, the doctor leaned back in his chair, smug as ever, unaware of the storm building above him. Administration's panicking over construction permits, a nurse mentioned, scrolling her phone. Something about the landlord. The doctor waved a hand. Who cares? Paperwork drama. Has nothing to do with us. Apparently it does, the nurse pressed. Rumor says the landlord might be him. The guy in bed 9. The doctor laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "Please, that man in charge of this building, don't insult me." But across the hall, the administrator's heels clicked urgently toward the ward. The nurse's rumour was about to be confirmed. Back in his room, the man folded the papers and set them on the tray. His voice was calm, almost casual, but his eyes burned with intent. "They told me I don't deserve expensive medicine," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we'll see who deserves what." The intern exhaled shakily. She had risked everything by stepping into this, but something inside her whispered that she had just witnessed the beginning of an avalanche. The video appeared first on a local community forum, a grainy clip filmed from the hallway outside the patient's room. The audio was muffled, but clear enough to capture the doctor's voice. "You don't deserve expensive medicine." There was a pause, then the patient's calm but hoarse reply. "One day, you'll regret those words." Within hours, the clip spread to Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. Hashtags multiplied. Deserve care. Hospital bias. Not a charity. At first, the comments were divided. Some defended the doctor. Resources are limited. Not everyone gets the good stuff. But more and more saw something darker. Listen to how he says it. That's not medical judgment. That's prejudice. That man is clearly sick, and this is how they treat him. Healthcare isn't a privilege, it's a right. By noon, news stations were looping the clip with bold captions. "Doctor to patient. You don't deserve expensive medicine." Inside the hospital, staff huddled around phones and monitors. The receptionist nurse covered her face with her hands. "It's everywhere," she whispered. The doctor scoffed. "So what? A little bad press." People forget these things in a week. But the administrator burst into the lounge, face pale. She slapped a newspaper onto the table. The headline glared in black ink. "Lease on hospital building frozen by owner, tied to discrimination video." The room went silent. She leaned across the table, her voice low and furious. "That man you mocked is not just a patient. He is the CEO of the company that owns this building. He holds our lease in his hands. And now, the world knows we humiliated him." The nurse gasped. The doctor laughed. "Too loud, too forced, impossible. Look at him. He's nothing." The administrator's eyes burned. "He's everything. And because of your arrogance, this hospital may not exist in 6 months." The doctor opened his mouth, but no words came. Back in his room, the patient lay quietly, scrolling his phone. His assistant's messages filled the screen. "Video is viral. Investors asking for comment. Media outside the building." He typed back with slow precision. "Not yet. Let them talk. Tomorrow, we act." He set the phone aside and adjusted his blanket. His chest ached, but the fire inside burned hotter than any pain. They had stripped him of dignity in this room, but beyond these walls, he was regaining it tenfold. Downstairs, the hospital lobby buzzed with reporters. Cameras flashed as journalists pressed administrators for comment. Why was the patient denied proper treatment? Did bias play a role? Will the hospital address the ownership conflict? Security tried to hold them back, but the questions kept coming, sharper, louder. For the first time, the staff who had mocked the man began to realize the truth. Their laughter had turned into a noose, tightening around the hospital's neck. That evening, in the administrator's office, the phone rang again. She answered, her voice trembling. "This is the city council," the voice said. "We've seen the video. Unless this hospital issues a public statement and corrective action plan, your permits will be revoked. Effective immediately." She hung up slowly, her hands shaking. For the first time in her career, she had no defense, no spin. The words of the patient echoed in her head like a curse. One day, you'll regret those words. And tomorrow had arrived. The staff lounge, once filled with casual laughter, now buzzed with frantic whispers and pointed fingers. Phones lit up with headlines, and the TV on the wall replayed the viral clip for the 100th time. The receptionist nurse paced near the coffee machine, her hands trembling. "This isn't my fault. I was just following orders." another nurse snapped. You laughed. Everyone saw it. Your face is in the video. Do you realize you're trending? People are calling you the cruel nurse. She covered her face, sobbing. I didn't mean it like that. The doctor slammed his fist on the table, the sound startling everyone. Enough! We don't answer to the internet. I made a medical judgment. End of story. But a younger nurse shot back, her voice shaking with fury. Medical judgment? You told a patient he didn't deserve medicine. That wasn't clinical. It was cruel. The room went silent. The doctor's face darkened, but before he could respond, the administrator burst in, her expression grim. You idiots have no idea what you've done. That man isn't just a patient. He's the CEO of the company that owns this building. Do you understand? He holds our lease, our permits, our entire future in his hands. Murmurs erupted. One orderly whispered, So it's true. Another gasped. The landlord? Him? The doctor scoffed, his voice brittle. You expect me to believe that? Look at him. He's just... He stopped, the words faltering under the weight of the administrator's glare. It doesn't matter what you believe, she said coldly. It's already in the press. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the hospital, the intern sat alone, her clipboard forgotten. She stared at her notes, but the words blurred, replaced by the memory of the patient's steady eyes, the quiet dignity in his voice. She whispered to herself, I should have said something. I should have stopped it. Her phone buzzed. A notification. Do you work at St. Andrews? Have you witnessed bias in treatment? Contact the press. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the link. Fear clawed at her chest. If she spoke, she could lose her career before it even began. But if she stayed silent, she was complicit. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and whispered, I won't be silent again. In his room, the patient sat propped up against the pillows, his assistant beside him. Papers were spread across the tray table lease agreements, contracts, emails from legal counsel. Sir, the assistant said quietly, the board is asking if you'll release a statement tonight. He shook his head slowly. Not tonight. Tomorrow. Let them sweat. Let them wonder what comes next. She hesitated. And the hospital staff? His gaze hardened. They've already judged themselves. Tomorrow, the world will hear the verdict. The assistant nodded, gathering the papers back into her folio. As she left, the man leaned back against the pillows, exhaling slowly. His chest ached, his body weakened by neglect, but his resolve was iron. They had tried to strip him of worth. Tomorrow, he would show them what worth truly meant. Back in the lounge, the staff turned on each other again. It's your fault, one nurse hissed at the doctor. No, it's yours, he snapped back. You laughed, another reminded. You let it happen, the intern whispered, stepping into the doorway. Her voice shook, but her words carried weight. All of you. The room froze, stunned by her sudden defiance. You treated him like nothing, she continued, her eyes burning. But he isn't nothing, and now the world knows it. Silence. The weight of her words pressed down like a stone. The doctor opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And in that silence, the sound of the viral video replaying on the TV echoed again, the same damning words. You don't deserve expensive medicine. By morning, the hospital lobby had transformed into a press arena. Reporters crowded near the glass doors, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward at every staff member who dared to walk through. Why was the patient denied advanced medication? Did racial bias play a role? Is it true he owns this building? Security tried to push the press back, but the questions cut through like knives. Patients arriving for appointments stopped and stared, whispering to one another. The once proud hospital now looked like a fortress under siege. Upstairs, in the administrator's office, chaos reigned. Phones rang non-stop. Aides rushed in and out with updates that only made things worse. The city council is demanding an emergency meeting. Protesters are gathering outside. The news stations are calling this the Deserve Care scandal. The administrator slammed her fist against the desk. "We need a statement now." One aide stammered, "What do we say?" She froze, staring out the window at the throngs of reporters below. There was nothing to say. The video had spoken louder than any press release ever could. In the patient's room, the atmosphere was strangely calm compared to the storm outside. The man sat propped up against pillows, his phone in hand. His assistant sat beside him, scrolling through a tablet. "The story is everywhere," she said softly. "You're trending worldwide. People aren't just angry, they're demanding change." The man scrolled through messages. Senators, CEOs, journalists, activists. The world had seen his humiliation, and now it waited for his response. "Draft a statement," he said quietly. She nodded, opening a blank document. "What do you want to say?" He thought for a long moment, then spoke, his voice steady. "That healthcare isn't a privilege, that no patient should ever be told they don't deserve care, and that this isn't just about me, it's about everyone they've ever turned away." The assistant typed furiously, his words appearing on the screen. "Release it at noon," he added. "Let them hear it while the cameras are still rolling." In the staff lounge, panic spread like fire. The receptionist nurse sat with her head in her hands, sobbing quietly. "I'll never get another job. They're calling me the face of cruelty." The doctor paced furiously. "This is out of control. He's manipulating this. He's making it bigger than it is." A younger nurse snapped, "He doesn't have to make it bigger. You did that yourself the second you told him he didn't deserve care." The intern spoke up again, her voice quiet but firm. "You treated him like he was invisible, but he isn't invisible. He's more powerful than any of us." The doctor froze, his expression twisting. For the first time, he seemed afraid. At exactly noon, the man's statement went live. The headline blazed across screens. CEO and hospital owner responds to discrimination scandal. The text read, "Yesterday, while lying in a hospital bed, I was told I did not deserve the medicine that could save my life. I was judged not by my condition, but by assumptions about my worth. No patient should ever hear those words. Healthcare is not a gift reserved for the privileged. It is a human right. My family, my company, and I will fight to ensure this never happens again." The hospital lobby erupted as reporters read the statement aloud on air. Protesters outside cheered. On social media, the post was shared hundreds of thousands of times within minutes. Upstairs, the administrator buried her face in her hands. "We're finished," she whispered. Down the hall, the doctor slammed his fist into the wall, rage and fear warring in his eyes. And in his bed, the man closed his eyes, breathing slowly. He had said little, but it was enough to shake the world outside those sterile walls. The hospital corridors pulsed with tension. Nurses rushed past, their eyes avoiding his door, as if his very presence had become radioactive. From down the hall, the muffled roar of the crowd in the lobby rose like a storm. Reporters, protesters, flashing cameras, all waiting. Inside his room, the man swung his legs over the side of the bed. The IV line had been removed at his request. He wore not the thin gown of a patient, but a tailored charcoal suit his assistant had brought from home. Even weakened by days of mistreatment, he carried himself with a presence that straightened every crease in the fabric. His assistant adjusted his tie. "Are you sure you're ready?" He met her eyes, steady and calm. "They told me I didn't deserve medicine. Today, I'll show them what I deserve." The door opened. The young intern stood there nervously, clutching a clipboard. Her voice trembled. "The lobby is full. Press, protesters, city officials, and the doctor. He's there too." He gave her a faint nod. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The walk to the elevator was slow, deliberate. Every step echoed through the sterile halls, staff flattening against the walls as he passed. Some looked away in shame, others in fear. The intern followed at a distance, her hands shaking, knowing history was about to unfold before her eyes. The elevator doors slid open. The ride down was silent but electric, the hum of machinery carrying the weight of something irreversible. When the doors opened again, the noise hit like a wave. The lobby was a battlefield. Reporters pressed against the barriers, cameras flashing. Protesters raised signs. Dignity for all patients. Healthcare is a right. Security struggled to keep order, and there, near the reception desk, stood the doctor. His jaw clenched, his face pale but defiant. The man stepped forward, the crowd parting instinctively around him. He moved with quiet authority, his voice carrying across the chaos as he stopped in front of the desk, the same place where he had been humiliated days earlier. "Yesterday," he began, his tone calm but thunderous, "I lay in that bed as a patient. I was weak, I was sick, and I was told I didn't deserve medicine, not because of science, not because of need, but because of prejudice." The cameras erupted in flashes. Reporters scribbled furiously. He turned his gaze on the doctor, locking eyes. "You looked at me and saw nothing. A man unworthy of care. But what you didn't see is that I am the CEO of the company that owns this building. The roof over your head, the floor under your feet, all of it exists because I allow it." The crowd gasped audibly. The nurse at the desk staggered back, pale as paper. The doctor's lips parted, but no sound came. "And if I," the man continued, voice rising, "the man funding your very workplace, can be told I don't deserve medicine, what does that say for every other patient who comes here without power, without wealth, without a voice?" The lobby fell silent. Even the protesters lowered their signs, hanging on his every word. The man stepped closer to the doctor, his voice dropping to a razor's edge. "You told me I don't deserve medicine, but what you've proven is that you don't deserve the honor of being called a healer." The doctor flinched, his defiance cracking under the weight of those words. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions, their microphones capturing every syllable. The man turned to the cameras, his final words sharp as a verdict. "This hospital has forgotten its purpose. Today, I remind you, medicine is not for the privileged few. It is for everyone, and as long as I own this building, that will change." The lobby erupted. Cheers from protesters, shouts from reporters, the frantic hum of a system collapsing under its own arrogance. The doctor stood frozen, exposed and powerless. The man straightened his jacket, his presence filling the room. For the first time, the world saw him not as a patient, but as the man he truly was, and as the reckoning this hospital had never expected. The glass doors of the hospital slid open, and the roar of the crowd outside swelled to thunder. Protesters pressed against barricades, their chants shaking the air. "Healthcare for all! Dignity for all!" Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, their microphones like a forest of black stems reaching toward him. The man stepped into the daylight, no longer cloaked in the anonymity of a patient's gown. The tailored suit caught the sun, his posture regal despite the fatigue in his body. Behind him, the young intern and his assistant followed, witnesses to a moment that was no longer just personal, but historical. He approached the podium hastily erected on the hospital steps. The crowd fell into a hush, an ocean of eyes fixed on him. He placed his hands on either side of the lectern, his voice steady but resonant. 2 days ago, he began, I lay in a hospital bed as a patient. I was sick, vulnerable, in need of care. And in that moment, the doctor responsible for my life looked me in the eye and said, "You don't deserve expensive medicine." The words rippled through the crowd, anger and disbelief simmering. He continued, his voice stronger. I was judged not by my condition, but by assumptions, by prejudice, by arrogance. And if this can happen to me, the man who owns the very building this hospital operates in, then imagine what happens to the millions without power, without money, without a voice. The protesters erupted, chants surging again, this time louder, sharper. Justice now! Justice now! He raised a hand, and the noise subsided. His eyes scanned the reporters, the cameras, the faces of ordinary people who had gathered to see him. This is not about one man. This is not about one doctor or one nurse or even one hospital. This is about a system that has forgotten its oath: to heal, to serve, to treat every patient with dignity. When a child, a mother, a worker, or a father walks into a hospital, they should never be asked to prove their worth. Their life is their proof. The crowd erupted in applause, but he pressed on, his voice cutting through the noise. I will no longer fund a hospital that chooses arrogance over humanity. Effective today, my company is freezing all leases and donations until St. Andrews rebuilds its policies from the ground up. And beyond that, I am establishing a foundation dedicated to ensuring this never happens again. An independent body that will track, expose, and reform discriminatory practices in healthcare across this nation. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed wildly, but he wasn't finished. This is not revenge, he said, his tone firm but measured. This is responsibility. If healthcare is not equal, then it is not healthcare at all. And I will dedicate every resource I have to making sure no one else hears the words I heard in that hospital bed. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, chants. Protesters waved their signs higher. Reporters scrambled to broadcast the soundbite that was already rewriting headlines. If healthcare isn't equal, it isn't healthcare at all. The man stepped back from the podium, his silhouette framed against the gleaming hospital doors behind him. He was no longer just a patient, no longer even just a CEO. He was the spark of something larger, something the hospital could no longer contain. The young intern watched from the side, her heart pounding. For the first time since she had begun her training, she believed medicine could change. The man raised his head to the crowd, his voice carrying one final line that echoed through the plaza. Dignity is not a luxury. It is a right. The cheers thundered, rising like a wave. And behind the glass doors, the staff who had once mocked him now watched, powerless, as the world shifted outside their walls. The boardroom of St. Andrews Hospital was suffocating with silence. Around the long mahogany table sat administrators, lawyers, and executives, their faces grim. On the large screen at the end of the room, news channels replayed the man's speech on loop. His words, "If healthcare isn't equal, it isn't healthcare at all," rang like a verdict that could not be appealed. The chief administrator finally broke the silence. Her voice was low, cold. "We must act. Immediately." Her gaze locked onto the doctor, seated near the end of the table. He shifted uneasily, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. "Effective immediately," she said, her tone sharp as glass. "You are suspended pending investigation." He shot to his feet, his voice breaking with outrage. "This is absurd. I made a professional judgment. This is nothing but political theater." "No," she replied icily. "This is survival, and you've destroyed ours." The doctor's face reddened, but he had no answer. Security entered quietly, standing by the door. The message was clear. His time was over. The administrator turned next to the receptionist nurse, who sat trembling, eyes swollen from crying. "Your conduct was inexcusable. Your face is plastered across every news channel in the country. You are terminated, effective immediately." The nurse sobbed openly, pleading, "Please, I didn't mean." "No one cares what you meant," the administrator snapped. "You humiliated a patient in need. You mocked him. You mocked us all." The nurse collapsed into her chair, broken. Elsewhere in the hospital, the young intern sat on a bench in the courtyard, clutching her phone. A journalist's number glowed on the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She remembered her silence in the patient's room, the way her fear had kept her still. Then she pressed, "Call." Her voice shook as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, I was there. I saw everything. And it wasn't medicine, it was prejudice." Her confession hit the press within hours. Headlines exploded. "Intern confirms discrimination at St. Andrews." Public opinion, already furious, now turned volcanic. In living rooms across the country, families watched the story unfold. Parents shook their heads, Children asked questions. Talk shows debated it. Was this an isolated incident or the symptom of a broken system? Activists insisted it was the latter. Politicians took sides. This is a wake-up call, one senator declared on live television. We must address racial bias in healthcare. The doctor left the hospital through a side entrance, but he couldn't escape the cameras waiting outside. Reporters swarmed, questions flying. Do you regret what you said? Do you deny discriminating against the CEO? Will you apologize? He shoved past them, but the footage played on every evening news broadcast. A disgraced physician fleeing from accountability. The receptionist nurse faced a similar fate. Neighbours whispered, strangers jeered. Job offers vanished before they could be extended. Her name was now forever tied to cruelty. Meanwhile, the man's words spread far beyond the hospital steps. Social media buzzed with clips, parodies, songs, even classroom discussions. His phrase became a rallying cry. If healthcare isn't equal, it isn't healthcare at all. In Washington, lawmakers drafted proposals for stricter anti-discrimination oversight in hospitals. Advocacy groups mobilized, citing his case as proof of systemic failure. In his office, far from the chaos, the man sat with his wife. Their son played on the floor, unaware of the storm his father had unleashed. She looked at him with quiet awe. You've started something bigger than yourself, she whispered. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the window where the city lights flickered. They tried to tell me I didn't deserve care. Now the whole world is asking who deserves what. And it won't stop here. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, his voice steady. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. The storm that began in a hospital room spread like wildfire across the nation. What had started as a single sentence, "You don't deserve expensive medicine," had ignited something larger, something unstoppable. Television networks dedicated entire specials to the scandal. Panels of doctors, ethicists, and civil rights leaders debated the deeper question. Who decides who deserves care? Protesters marched in cities from New York to Los Angeles, their chants echoing in unison. Healthcare is a right, not a privilege. On college campuses, students organized teach-ins, holding up posters of the man's words. In churches, pastors quoted him in sermons. Even late-night comedians turned the scandal into biting satire. The doctor's smirk becoming a meme, his words replayed with captions like, "Congratulations, you played yourself." In Washington, lawmakers could no longer ignore the uproar. Congressional hearings were called, with St. Andrews cited as Exhibit A for systemic prejudice. Bills were drafted proposing mandatory bias training for medical professionals, whistleblower protections for interns and residents, and oversight committees to review patient complaints. Activists seized the moment. Civil rights organizations rallied behind the man's statement, urging Americans to demand accountability in their own hospitals. Families across the country began sharing stories of neglect, children dismissed as fakers, women whose pain was minimized, elderly patients ignored because they couldn't pay. Each story added fuel to the fire. Each story echoed his. In his office, the man sat surrounded by stacks of letters and emails, hundreds arriving each day. His assistant sorted them into piles: supporters, victims, partnerships, press requests. People are begging for leadership, she said softly. They don't just want you to fight St. Andrews. They want you to fight for them. He leaned back in his chair, tired but resolute. Then that's what I'll do. He began outlining the framework for his new foundation, a national watchdog dedicated to exposing bias in healthcare, funding clinics in underserved communities, and ensuring access to advanced treatments regardless of race, wealth, or background. This isn't charity, he told his board during a late-night call. This is justice. No patient should be humiliated for asking to live. Meanwhile, St. Andrews Hospital staggered under the weight of collapse. Donations evaporated, the city suspended expansion permits, and patients fled to rival institutions. The once proud brand now carried the stench of disgrace. The doctor who had uttered the damning phrase vanished from public view, but his name trended weekly as a cautionary tale. The receptionist nurse moved out of town, unable to face the whispers, and the intern, once silent, was celebrated as a whistleblower, invited to speak at medical schools about courage and responsibility. One evening, the man appeared on a nationally televised interview. The host leaned forward, her tone solemn. "You could have stayed silent, taken revenge privately. Instead, you chose to speak publicly to make this about everyone. Why?" He looked into the camera, his dark eyes steady. "Because when I lay in that bed, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about the millions who don't have a voice, who don't have the power to fight back. If I stayed silent, nothing would change. And silence is complicity." The host nodded. "What do you want people to remember from all of this?" He paused, then spoke with quiet force. "That dignity is not something you earn. It's something you are owed, simply by being human." Across the nation, millions of viewers sat in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Months passed, but the scandal refused to fade. St. Andrew's Hospital, once considered a jewel of the city's medical landscape, now bore the reputation of a sinking ship. The grand marble lobby that had once impressed donors stood nearly empty. Patients cancelled appointments, shifting their trust to rival institutions. Community leaders urged families to avoid St. Andrew's entirely, citing its toxic culture. Donations, once flowing in millions, evaporated. Without its benefactors' support, the hospital's research programs stalled. Expansion plans were abandoned. By winter, entire wings sat half-darkened, their hallways silent except for the echo of half-staffed shifts. What had been pride had become ruin. For the doctor, the fall was swift and brutal. The medical board stripped him of his license after a months-long investigation revealed a pattern of dismissive behaviour. News outlets ran exposés on his past, uncovering complaints from patients who had been ignored or belittled. His name became shorthand for arrogance. "Don't pull a Dr. X" became a phrase among young residents. The receptionist nurse fared no better. Fired and disgraced, she found her face immortalised in memes captioned "Healthcare's cruelest smile." She applied for jobs in neighbouring states, but every employer Googled her name and quietly declined. In the end, she disappeared from the public eye, a ghost of her former self. The young intern, however, took a different path. Branded a whistleblower, she was invited to conferences, medical schools, and panels. Her trembling confession, "I saw everything, and it wasn't medicine, it was prejudice," became a rallying cry for her generation of doctors. Though haunted by guilt, she transformed it into courage, vowing never again to be silent. Meanwhile, the man's foundation grew rapidly. Offices opened in major cities, staffed by advocates, researchers, and doctors determined to confront discrimination. A 24-hour hotline was established for patients who believed they were denied care unfairly. Within weeks, tens of thousands of calls poured in. The Foundation released its first national report, a staggering compilation of data exposing systemic bias in hospitals and clinics. Charts and testimonies painted a clear, undeniable picture. People of colour, the poor, and the uninsured were consistently given inferior treatment. The findings made headlines. Politicians could no longer dismiss the issue as anecdotal. Medical schools began integrating the Foundation's training modules into their curriculum. Hospitals scrambled to adopt new oversight committees, desperate to avoid becoming the next St. Andrew's. One evening, the man stood before a crowd at the Foundation's new headquarters. The audience included community leaders, doctors, activists, and ordinary citizens who had travelled miles to hear him speak. He raised his voice, steady and resolute. "They told me I didn't deserve medicine, but this movement proves something greater. Every person deserves dignity. Every patient deserves care. And together, we are rewriting the rules of healthcare." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, recording the moment as another chapter in his story. At home, life felt different. His wife sat beside him on the balcony, the city skyline glowing in the distance. Their son played inside, laughter spilling through the glass doors. She turned to him, her voice soft. "Do you ever regret it? Speaking out?" He shook his head. "No. They tried to take my dignity. Instead, they gave me purpose." She smiled faintly, resting her head on his shoulder. "And now, the world listens." He looked out at the city, the lights shimmering like scattered stars. "This isn't the end," he whispered. "It's only the beginning." The city skyline glowed in the fading light, glass towers catching the last blush of sunset. From the balcony of his penthouse, the man stood in quiet reflection. The air was cool, carrying the hum of distant traffic, but for once, it felt calm. Behind him, through the sliding glass doors, his son's laughter echoed across the living room. The boy, stronger now, darted across the carpet with a toy airplane in hand, his mother chasing playfully after him. The sound filled the home with warmth, a sound that, weeks ago, he had feared he might never hear again. The man turned, watching them for a moment, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He remembered the sterile hospital walls, the doctor's sneer, the words that had cut deeper than his illness. "You don't deserve expensive medicine." Those words had almost crushed him. Instead, they had built a movement. Elsewhere in the city, St. Andrew's Hospital stood in shadow. Its name, once synonymous with prestige, had become a cautionary tale. Students in medical schools studied it not as a model, but as a warning. Its staff had scattered. The doctor, stripped of his license, vanished into obscurity. The receptionist nurse, disgraced, was remembered only as a meme. The administrator retired quietly. Her career ended in shame. Their legacy was not healing, but humiliation. But across the nation, change was taking root. Hospitals established new oversight boards. Bias training became mandatory. Patient advocacy programs multiplied. And at the center of it all was the foundation he had built. Its hotline never stopped ringing. Its data-shaped legislation. Its clinics in underserved neighborhoods brought medicine to those who had been ignored for decades. At conferences, young doctors invoked his story. Dignity is not a luxury, it's a right. The phrase became etched into the culture of medicine, a reminder that the measure of a healer was not in who they chose to treat, but in who they never refused. On the balcony, his wife joined him, slipping her hand into his. They stood together, watching the city lights blink alive. "Do you think it will last?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, then back at the horizon. "It has to. Because the moment we forget, the moment we grow complacent, we return to silence. And silence is what allowed this in the first place." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You've changed more than just a hospital." He exhaled slowly. "I didn't do it alone. It was every patient who spoke up, every voice that joined in. I was just the spark." Inside, their son called out, holding up his toy plane. "Daddy, look, I'm flying." The man's heart softened. He stepped back inside, scooping the boy into his arms. "Yes," he said with a smile, "you are." The camera of imagination pulled away. The family framed in warm light. The city sprawling beneath them. The once damned hospital, a faint silhouette on the horizon. Words appeared on the screen. They told him he didn't deserve medicine. He showed the world that everyone does. Dignity is not a gift. It is a right. The screen faded to black. Silence. Then only the echo of a truth that could no longer be denied.